Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and tonight we are live with Toriano as we are going to be looking through some of your hot takes on the 2024 NFL Draft. So this will be fun. It'll be a little triggering too, I'm sure, but I'm excited for it. How are you feeling, Toriano? Yeah, there's going to probably be a few I'm going to call cold. I know there's one for sure, but you know, some of it I would say was pretty based. I would say at the end of the day, but yeah, we'll run through them. We've got 11 here. If we've got extra time at the end, maybe we'll go through some in the chat. This was just something we posted on Twitter a couple days ago, but we'll go through those and then we'll try to keep up with chat, of course, even if it's other things. So let's jump into it. Our first one, and I'm going to go from what I think is not as hot of a take to maybe more hot of a take because there's a couple crazy ones towards the end. We're going to start out here. So this is from Driss, and he says Troy Franklin should be a first-round wide receiver. So what are your thoughts on that? I'll just defer to you right off the bat. Make it easy for myself. Yeah. Oh, shoot. We've actually, I apologize here. We might have an audio issue that happened. Okay, we're working on this right now. It might have to... I apologize for having you talk that whole time. They can't hear you right now, but... try saying something real quick. It's still not coming through. Okay, let's do... Okay. Alright, is that working now? Can you guys hear him?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Okay, we had to change it. The Discord source I have on OBS just wasn't working for some reason. I don't know why. But we're just gonna go off desktop audio. So if people message me on Discord, you're gonna hear that. But that's all right. So yeah, let's. I apologize, guys. We're gonna rewind here for a second since you just heard silence for a couple minutes. So we were talking about Troy Franklin as a first-round wide receiver. And so you can kind of give a synopsis again, but to just say like some of the things that you mentioned, you know, he's not really a first-round wide receiver when you consider the other prospects at the position. You look at his combine measurements as well. I feel like he came in way lighter than I thought. I mean, because I was a big Troy Franklin fan the whole process. Yeah. Like he was actually my wide receiver for a while. And it was on the assumption that the numbers we were getting from Oregon, that he was putting on weight every year. He was putting on like 13 pounds every year that's what they told us. And it did not look like that on film. And I should have realized that, but he was supposed to be, he was supposed to be like 187 last year. And I thought, well, okay, if he's keeping up with this, maybe he can get to 195, like somewhere around there. And then he's like, he looks like a taller Calvin Ridley. He's a good route runner, and you can justify taking him towards the end of the first round. But he came into the combine, didn't hit those measurements, and then he ends up not running that fast compared to guys like literally the two guys he's being compared to, if he's going to be a first round wide receiver, which is Brian Thomas Jr. and A.D. Mitchell in whatever order you'd like. He was slower than both those guys. So it's like, okay, he basically, the only thing I think you can argue he's better than some of them in is route running. And I think A.D. Mitchell's a better route runner. So
yeah,
it sucks because I was a huge fan, but those are just kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Before we had the technical issues, my biggest point was if you're looking for a guy in the first round at wide receiver, you want a guy that stands out. You want a guy that can be a game breaker. You're not necessarily looking for a complementary piece. If you're going to take a guy in the first round, I think you're looking for a guy to be an impact player. Year one, you want a guy that can compete, whether it be as your wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, maybe your 3 if you have a loaded room. But I don't see Troy Franklin being a game breaker in year one. I don't see the game breaking speed. Yes, he's a hell of a route runner, but I don't think he's a better route runner than A.D. Mitchell.
For sure.
I think his hands are excellent. I think he has some of the best hands in the draft class, but you still have certain drop issues for him. You know, you have a couple of questions similar to a prospect like Javon Baker, which is another guy that I'm sure we'll talk about in this. But I just don't see him being a standout guy in any area that you look for to flash at wide receiver that makes you say, okay, that's the next guy after Rome Odunze, or that's the next guy after Malik Neighbors that you select.
And even if we make the argument that I think more than like 5 receivers go first round, like say you're talking about a 6 guy sneaking in, I don't think he beats out any of those guys as well. You know, you're talking about, for example, Lad McConkey. Like you've got even taller guys like him with Ricky Pearsall that move around all over the formation, and they're just reliable as it gets. It's just a question of like, okay, what's the ceiling? Like I kind of know what I'm getting, and it's exciting to get someone who can be a wide receiver 1. But when I look at like Troy Franklin, I'd think the same thing in that, yeah, this guy's probably not a wide receiver 1 at the next level. And I wish he was. Like I was a huge advocate for him for quite a while. It was probably the player I've been on the most for Jacksonville drafting over the whole cycle since last year. But he had to separate in what is maybe the deepest wide receiver class we'll see this decade, even our lifetimes, for all we know right now. And he did nothing to separate himself from the rest of the competition, I felt like.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, when you look at a guy, you want him to be able to be the best route runner, the most technical. You know, even if you were to say he may not be the best route runner, but he has the best breaks in his routes. He can separate like nobody else in this class. I can't say that for him.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, it's, you know, he's no Keon Coleman, don't get me wrong, but I don't see him being a Malik Neighbors.
For sure, yeah. Those guys are in, even in like
Completely
the best
theater.
things for, yeah, even the best things for Franklin, he's in like a different stratosphere. He's talking about Neighbors, like where he is. But yeah, I think like to say some nice things about Franklin, you at least know, like, I mean, I would say you're getting a good player. I don't think he's a bad player at all. I think he's like maybe a high priority 2nd round pick, depending on what you need on your team. And he could have versatility. Like if you could play him outside, first of all, because that's where he played in college most of the time. The issue is obviously the weight, but you can kick him inside too. And that's where I think like he's going to be best in the NFL as one of these tall slot receivers, not going up against big defensive backs who can come over the middle, get open, and stretch the field as well. And he could be a really good fit in that kind of system. He just has to go to the right team. And I don't think teams in the late first round, it would make enough sense for. Maybe if like, I think talking about who might pick him, there's 2 teams I could see like stretching it to try to solve wide receiver issues. The first would be Buffalo, where they need another playmaker, but I don't know how that really fits because they need an X at this point because they lost Gabe Davis. They have Curtis Samuel Khalil Shakir, I don't know what he plays exactly, but that's probably not an ideal X because usually you're wide receiver one. And then
Yeah.
you look at Baltimore as well, who could be a team, but you've already got Zay Flowers, who's probably supposed to be more of a slot receiver. And so now Troy Franklin might have to play outside, but there's not really much there in their receiving room to where like they could consider taking Troy Franklin. But that's also an organization that generally tends to pick really well in the first round, and they take the player who falls. So, for example, what if Byron Murphy falls to them? Like they're going to make that pick, or somehow Latham falls. Like those kinds of players, it doesn't seem like they'll be there, but one will, and they're going to make that happen. So I don't think he'll go first round, but I do think he's a high priority, like second round pick potentially, depending on the names that are there.
Yeah, so like the Ravens are really great at picking best available player. When you look back at their past draft classes, that's the type of organization we want the Jaguars to be. So, you have to continue to look at them and say, how do we emulate them? So, with that brought into the conversation, you have to look at it and say, at 17, your first 3 wide receivers are off the board. Would Troy Franklin be in consideration? In this case, in regard to the hot take, I would say no. That's a very hot take for them to say that would be the guy you select. I would not select him over A.D. Mitchell. I would not select him over Brian Thomas Jr. I probably wouldn't select him over Xavier Worthy or Ricky Pearsall. And that might be a hot take. But
that's a good point with Worthy as well, because he's a good route runner too. He's got the outside experience, and he's not much smaller actually, but he has that ridiculous speed. Like you can easily argue that Xavier Worthy is worth more. But I think like for him to go early-ish on day 2, it might require that like 2022 wide receiver run that we saw where just every single player was flying off the board. We got to 65, and the best pick at receiver, just based off like general consensus, was a 5th-round prospect in Jalen Tolbert. We were talking to like John Mechie that offseason at the time. We wanted to get him at 65, and he was gone at like 44 to Houston. And that was with an ACL tear the year before. So maybe that happens, and then Franklin goes really early, 2nd round. We'll have to see. We do have a question, though, here about who is the best press man corner in the 2024 NFL draft. And I'll give a look at this next take real quick, but I would say probably you have to go with Kool-Aid McKinstry because he's more experienced than Mitchell and more experienced than Arnold. I do think, maybe this is the hot take, I do think Quinyon Mitchell can be the best one. Like, just from what we saw at the Senior Bowl, he was just great. And that's why he's my cornerback 1 now, because I can't be unfair, with him. He's every opportunity he's got in this offseason, he's elevated himself. He's done an incredible job. And really the only thing I can hit on at all was 1 rep against Roman Wilson at the Senior Bowl where he lost his footing. I don't care about that.
Roman Wilson was balling.
Yeah.
Roman Wilson was balling.
Yeah, for sure. And he had a hell of a week. There were a few guys like that, and those are a lot of those like early round 2 receivers. So our next take, though, we've got 3 here, and obviously we hit on Troy Franklin already, which is why I put this after. Byron Murphy as defensive tackle 1, and then J.J. McCarthy should not go in the 1st round, but he will. So we'll talk about like Byron Murphy first. I don't have him as my top guy. I can see why some people do. I think when I look at his film, the thing that stands out immediately is how ridiculous of leverage he can get when he's engaged with blockers. And that comes from being a small prospect. Like, he's 6'1.5". And that's the major problem. And I do think he will be really good at the next level. But I look at Jerzon Newton, and I think he's got a little bit better of measurements in general. He might have smaller hands, if I remember. I'd have to look at my draft board. But I think Jerzon Newton is just more of a force, and I would take that guy above Byron Murphy, and I would take him at 17. I'd even trade up for him if you have to, even with the players we got, because you need a rotation. You can't just have 2 guys at defensive tackle. And you could say we got draft picks there as well.
Yeah, when you look at the roster, you still have You still have Tyler Lacey, who I think
Yep,
everybody's
that's it.
sleeping on. You still have, Roy Robertson Harris, who can play inside and out. So you still have him at defensive tackle depth. They've talked about moving Trayvon inside and out, as well as Josh Allen mentioned in his presser that he's going to be scheme versatile. He's going to be able to move all along the line, which I'm sure Nielsen has talked to everyone in that room about. So you still have guys that you can move around. You want to continue to add depth, but it's not a major concern when we thought of before the offseason. But you can add one of these high level prospects and turn it into a top 5 unit if you want to.
And they can
So
kick outside as well. That's another thing. Like especially with Newton, Armstead kicks outside at
yeah,
defensive end. You have
Lacey
so
kicks
much
outside.
versatility with your players, and they're masters of their craft as well. Because sometimes
Exactly.
versatile players just they do a lot, but they don't do it at a high level. And we have some good versatile players. But for Byron Murphy versus Johnny Newton, what do you think there?
I have had Jerzon as my DT1 probably since the beginning of the draft cycle, and it has not changed, honestly. For about a week or so, when I was diving into Murphy's film, I was a little intrigued, but he's been the DT2 pretty much the entire cycle. So I think Jerzon has the potential to be, a lot of people have said it. I think he has the potential to be the best defensive player in the class. So, for me, if I'm comparing him to Byron, I'm gonna sit there and say I'd rather have Newton. I'd rather have the guy that can go wreck an offense, wreck a line, take on the double teams, get through to the passer, or stop the run, and he can play on the edge. Oh man, I'd rather have him.
He
And
runs like a
he's a little bigger, a
defensive
little
end.
taller. Yeah, he's got the speed, he's got the build, he's got the motor. I'd rather have that guy. No offense to Byron Murphy, but I think that Jerzon is the more complete prospect.
Yeah, and these guys they might end up going back to back in the draft.
Yeah,
I do think that actually ends up happening, and that's why like if you want Johnny Newton and you see him falling in mock drafts all the time, I don't think you can trade back like they're talking about, or people in general are talking about scouts. That is because you look at Cincinnati, they lost DJ Reader. They know the importance of a strong interior defensive line because having a good defensive line is how they got to Mahomes. That's how they won their games against him. And
yeah,
obviously they lost last time, and then they didn't have Burrow when they played them in 2023. But they know the importance of that. They need help there. And then obviously you look at the Rams, and the Rams just lost Aaron Donald, and they can't really replace him, of course, because it's Aaron Donald. But there are two very good prospects here, and one of them should be available. So I could see them going that direction. It's possible they do something else. They could be the Latu team, perhaps, but I could definitely see these guys, despite maybe me putting Newton much above Byron Murphy, and it's probably by 6 or 7 spots. They're probably going to go
mhm,
back to back because the run's going to start on those two players when teams panic and they're like, oh, well, we've got one really good defensive tackle left, and that is a premium position. These guys are paid like basically as much as receivers. So you're talking about basically the second highest paid position in football.
yeah. With the defensive tackles, I think Byron Murphy has the chance to be an instant impact player depending on the unit he goes to. I kind of look at him not more so in the vein of a Josh Allen, but I think he feeds off of, who's alongside him the same way that a Josh Allen would, more so from an interior presence standpoint. But you've got to have guys around him, and I think if he were to go to the Rams, that'd be a really good situation. It'd be a really good marketing standpoint for, you have Byron Young and Byron Murphy. I think they would have a really good defensive line if they were able to inject Murphy in there. Nobody's going to replace Aaron Donald, but if you're able to go out and get another first round draft pick like Murphy, I think he could be an instant impact guy. He's just my DT2 personally.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. I think he's a very good player, but I would definitely have Newton as the priority, and he'd be the one that I would consider moving up for if I'm Jacksonville, if I have to. That, of course, is the prerequisite. I think you're only worrying about maybe Seattle at 16. And so that would be the team I'm looking at as a potential bidder for Jerzon Newton. But we'll definitely see what happens there. Now, we're taking quite a bit on each one, so we'll speed it up a little bit. But we do have the J.J. McCarthy take here, not going first round. I think, I've seen it the same way for quite a lot of this draft cycle. I would say he's worth a first-round pick now. And I have him probably on the same level as Penix and Nix, although McCarthy's ceiling is probably higher because we don't know. It's like trading for a draft pick. That could be anything. You could get a great player. You could get a bust. You just don't know what it is with McCarthy. He might not be the leader they need. He might be an incredible leader. He probably will be a great leader. But I don't know if he'd be my top priority. If I was drafting him, I would probably want him in the teens, but he's not going to go in the teens. He's probably going to go 4th or 5th overall at the end of the day, or just 6th to the Giants. They might just sit there and get him.
Yeah. If I'm New York, I'm calling Minnesota to see if we can trade down. I know that may be a hot take in itself, but I think Minnesota's desperate. I think you may be able to get both of those first-round picks, if not a first and some additional picks. But if you're able to get 11 and 23 for 6th overall, they take J.J. McCarthy there. I think that's a good bargain. And I think the Giants have a little bit more holes to fill rather than just taking a receiver or taking a quarterback and rushing an offense that is not ready to compete. So I think J.J. McCarthy will go in the first round. I personally think he should. I have him in my top 30. And I have him at QB4. So, in a draft class like this that's going to be offensive heavy, I think he should be a first-round pick. The potential is there. I think the leadership is there. Winning a national championship. It wasn't a pass-heavy offense, but even if you're looking for a game manager, you're not looking for a game manager with the top 5 pick. But if you're looking for a guy that can dictate the offense, make the right throws, make some insane throws, which we've seen on film, and still have potential as one of the younger guys in the draft class, I think you bank on that potential.
Yeah, it's a good pick for a team just as long as you understand the risk and the reward and you go about it the right way. And I think we mentioned the Giants for a moment at 6. If they stay put and take McCarthy, well, I think they need a lot of help on their roster. That might be the perfect place for him to go. I know that might sound stupid, but they're going to probably need to sit him a year. I think that's the best thing for him coming into the league. They're committed to Daniel Jones for another season. I would just, if I was them, take McCarthy if he's there and build up the best you can. Just get the best players. You already got Brian Burns. Next offseason, you're probably going to have a high draft pick again. You're just going to have to accept this season's probably not going to be great. And you're going to get some good players with your draft selections. So that's how I'd probably do it. That's probably the team I would take McCarthy with. That makes a lot of sense for them. Well, he's way lower of a ranking. It's a quarterback, and they need something in New York. And I wonder if, next year, well, I think they're going to be bad. What happens if Daniel Jones does just good enough to get you out of position? So that's not really worth it, especially when next year's class isn't the most. I mean, there's some quarterbacks who could be good, but it's not the most incredible. Now, I've got a comment here from Jimomania. Hope I said that right. I think we should move up with the Giants for neighbors if we decide to trade up. Give both first picks, aggressive like Houston last year. I personally agree. And actually, I was looking at this just hours before recording this video. I'm trying to see if there's a way to where Jacksonville can move up to 6 without, and that's if 6 is the pick to do it. It might be 5. That's also possible. But if there's a way to do it without giving up significant draft capital next year, if any. And I think what they should consider is it's going to be a lot cheaper to get up to, anywhere from 16 to 8, I would say, because we know with 8, the price is probably the second round pick. If we can get close and then say New York still wants that quarterback, you might still be able to send them an offer and say, hey, we'll flip you maybe our 3rd and our 4th rounder, maybe something in the future too, let's move up to 6, and then Tennessee's not taking a quarterback, and if they're taking calls, you have a great offer because you're sitting one pick behind them. They still get their guy, and you get your quarterback, and you gain draft capital. So I think that's a possible way to do it. I highly, highly doubt the Jaguars would do anything like that. But that's what I would be looking at. How can you maybe get Neighbors out of this class without giving up future picks, especially when they don't spend those later picks that well?
I think the most likely way to get up to, say, a 6, I don't think we get to 5. I think Harbaugh would tell the GM, hell no.
He doesn't trade down either.
Yeah, they don't really trade down in that scenario. It depends. It depends on what the Giants are expecting to be at 17. If they're expecting to take a pass rusher, I don't think they take another pass rusher. I don't know how much they love Ojulari at the moment.
Wait, who's that?
Azeez Ojulari.
Oh, you're okay, gotcha.
You know, if they project a guy like Latu to be down there at 17, you know, it just kind of depends on how the board falls or what they predict will happen. If they have their guy and he's expected to go in the teens, maybe they lighten up on what they demand. Maybe you throw in a player. Maybe they want a reliable receiver, and you say, "Hey, Zay Jones is healthy. You know, we got a quality receiver on a not too cap heavy contract. We'll throw him in there." Obviously, the 49ers were interested.
Yeah.
So he's still a tradable asset. So maybe that gets you off, and you say you don't have to throw in another third, or you don't have to throw in pick 116 this year. You know, I think it'll cost a pretty penny, though. I think you can't get out of it without giving either a next year, first or second, or throwing in 48. It's a difficult proposition to jump up those 11 spots. You know, we've seen it before happen with the Saints. They've done it before for Olave, and that was an interesting package, but it wasn't one that destroyed their whole draft.
It was a pretty nice deal for the Saints at the end of the day, and that's one of my thoughts too, was trading with Denver, because you can, right after that, you look at the trade last year from 12 to 6 where the Cardinals got Paris Johnson Jr. Effectively, the value that they gave up to move up, which it was like a few pick swaps, it was around what the 48th pick is. So you can move up to 12 for cheaper and then try to flip up there, but I think it's going to cost a little bit more. My thought is, with the Falcons, they need a pass rusher. There's 3 players at the top who are really good as pass rushers, and they're probably going to get one at 17. So that's a great deal for them, I think, and to get the extra pick, and they actually end up with Jacksonville's second-round pick that was tied up in the Calvin Ridley trade compensation, which is funny. That's what I would do, personally. Another player to throw out as a trade piece to the Giants, along with Zay Jones, is Roy Robertson Harris. And why I say that is because, well, it doesn't save Jacksonville any money. It's stupid cheap for the Giants to get him, because the deal ends up being like $2 million the first year, and then there's 2 years where it's a $6 million cap hit. And Roy Robertson Harris is a fine interior defensive lineman. Not great, but just like someone who can start. They trade away Leonard Williams. They still need help on the defensive line. That makes a ton of sense for the Giants to go get a player like that. So yeah, I'm looking at that. I'm looking at Zay Jones for sure. I think that's a great one. Someone threw out Cam Robinson. You could also look at Walker Little as a potential piece. Like, you've got players they need to think about moving on from. And I would be proactive if I was them this offseason with the guys that you know aren't going to be here long term, that aren't going to do anything, like a Chad Muma, for example. Just get something while you can. Like, what's the point in Chad Muma playing 40 reps and then having no trade value next year, and then he just goes to free agency? Like, a team like Green Bay needs him right now. They need a linebacker. They'll send you probably their next year's 5th, maybe even this year's. Like, that's what I'm looking at is definitely trying to get value out of some of your players to pay for some of this. But I'm
Yeah.
very much on board with the neighbors thing. And the reality is that you can make a lot of different moves and get a great player. Like you could do the Roma Dunze trade, like was just thrown out. You're only giving up 48 and maybe something else. And you could get outbid. That's the clear problem with it. But that's a lot more affordable. You could get Olu Fashanu. You could get Quinyon Mitchell. Both those players, I think you can move up to 13 or 14. What if you flip Walker Little to the Saints as a cheap player for them, send him another late pick, and move up to 14? Like, there's ways to be creative and still get a great player without mortgaging the farm. And really, it's just a lot of this year's draft picks and maybe one in the future. It comes down to me for, like, do you have a conviction about Malik Neighbors being an elite wide receiver one who is among the best of the best? And for me, I do. Because I remember watching Justin Jefferson's film before he came into the NFL. He was a player I wanted. We didn't get him. We picked Caleb Von Chase on before. Funny enough, I liked more, but I would have picked him at 9, which is disgusting, right? But it would have actually worked out because Jefferson would have been my choice later. We missed out on a big deal like that. And so if you have the same conviction about this player, then make it happen. Like, find a way to get it done. Because you're not going to regret it. Even if you trade a future first, Malik Neighbors is going to wreck the NFL when he gets to play his first game. It's a little bold, but
yeah. It's a bold take. You know, I feel the same way about Roma Dunze, so the sentiment is there.
Yeah, and he's going to be great at the next level. I just think Neighbors is going to be better. I don't think the character concerns are like an actual relative thing. I think it's very much overhyped at this point, and you can get a player who fits perfectly into the players you have right now because you get your Z out of that. Rome Odunze can play that as well. I do think he's more of an X, of course, because he's that guy you throw the ball to downfield that comes down with everything, and that'd be fine. Mm-hmm. But just I prefer Neighbors, and I would trade more to make it happen. So I gotta mute something here really quick so you guys don't hear 1,000 notifications. All right, so let's move on to our next one here. So we've got versus Edge 1 for me has better physical traits and run stopping potential than Latu and is more polished than Turner. McCarthy projects well, but is a bigger project than some say. We kind of talked about that. And then trading up for Rome is better than trading and signing Ayuk or T. So we'll talk about verse and then we'll talk about Rome versus Ayuk versus T, which I think are 3 very different conversations. And I'll explain why. But I think with verse, like, it's anyone you want out of those 3, like, can be your edge 1. If you prefer potential, that's great. If you prefer consistent production, that's great. If you prefer Latu because you think he's the more developed guy and the injuries aren't as big of a deal, that's great too. I personally have Turner as my edge 1, but I would be happy with any of them. I think they are like neck and neck and neck. Who do you have as your edge 1?
I personally have Turner. I think he has a similar level of pedigree as Verse. I remember coming into the draft cycle, he was projected really, really high. I want to say he was one of the, if not the top projected defensive player. He was one of. So for me, I think Turner has the production to match the polish, to match the potential. I think if you want a mix of all 3, it's Turner. If you want to go for the rocket ship, you go Verse. I think Verse has the highest potential of the 3, but he's also, I think he's the second oldest out of the 3. I think Latu is the oldest, and then Verse, and then Turner, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Verse and Latu are older prospects. Verse is like 23. He should have come out last year, but he was loyal to his program, so I respect that.
Oh yeah, I respect that through and through, and I think that shows a lot of character too. You know, for
he's
a guy
a good leader.
I want to come back and win a national championship. That stood out to me last year. So coming into the draft cycle, I think he could be. You know, there's a clear argument for him to be edge 1. You know, there's no debate. I won't sit here and say that nobody should say that. That's a very cold take to me. I think it's very easy to argue. But for me personally, he's edge two. I have Latu at three for the injury concerns as well as the shorter arms. But I would take Turner if I was
Yeah.
picking amongst the three.
Yeah, I completely agree. And do you feel like, just to ask this quick, you feel like Latu is like Aiden Hutchinson with like major injury concerns? That's kind of my general comp for him, because he feels like this super advanced pass rusher who doesn't have the power you expect maybe sometimes. Like um we've seen Aiden get overpowered quite a bit in the NFL at points, and it feels the same with Latu, like having seen him at the Senior Bowl, and then
Yeah.
obviously the alligator arms, quote unquote, that are okay, but they're not ideal.
Yeah, I think Latu is a little bit more technically refined than Aiden, which is, that's a big compliment, a big praise for him.
Yeah.
But I think that he definitely has a lower ceiling than Aiden in my opinion. I think Aiden is a little bit of a better run stopper, but I don't see either one of them being a guy that you say, okay, go around the corner and beat the edge and go and stop Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
No, like that's what you go and get Trevon Walker for. So I think that played a lot into our selection, but more so, I think that would make an argument for why we wouldn't select Latu if you're talking about the Jaguars selecting an edge.
Yeah, I don't think he fits that great with Jacksonville. He feels like more of a stand-up guy too, which we're not
Yeah.
going to do a ton of. Um, oh, hey, I appreciate the donation, Mr. Dolphin. That's awesome. That's the biggest donation I've got before. So thank you very much. It's great. You had to say, I don't like the idea of trading for Ayuk or Higgins at all. We are already spending a ton on receivers and have a slew of paydays coming next season. Get a
Yep.
star in the draft to mold in our system. So that leads us into our next part here. And I agree. Like, I think the best thing is to get an elite receiver out of this class. And you look at what the cost for Rome will be, because I do think he'll be there at number 8. That is something I expect. It's
Hmm.
probably 1748 in a later pick that's going to be a backup. So
Yeah.
the difference between what you pay for Rome and what you pay for Ayuk or Higgins right now is really just that 48th overall pick. And you look at the salary cap differences. If you're paying Ayuk over these next 5 years, say the fifth year option for both is identical, right? Then you got the 4
Hmm.
years of veteran contract for Ayuk or Higgins, and you got the 4 years on the rookie deal. It is a literal difference of nearly $100 million. That is like over a third of the cap in 1 year. That's a huge deal, and that's why you don't make those trades. But I
Yeah.
would say, when we're talking about T, I've been very clear about this. I think it's a matter of time before he's just on the market for free. Cincinnati is going all in this year. They're keeping their guys. They have a shot to make a run. I think you're going to see that through the way they draft. Once they finish that run, whether or not they win, I think Higgins is gone. It's a $26 million franchise tag. Even if they tag him, no one's going to want to pay that premium. Like,
Yeah.
it's not going to be a first round pick. It's going to be like a third, if anything. And that matches the comp pick maybe you would give up if, say, you lost a player and you had to sign Higgins in free agency and it cancels out what you would have gotten in return. So, like, I think with Higgins, if you want him, and this is the way I would have personally played it, I wouldn't have signed a big receiver. I just wouldn't have done that. Like, I wouldn't have signed Gabe Davis. I wouldn't have signed Calvin Ridley. I would have tagged and traded him if it was possible. I would
Hmm.
draft one this year. I've mentioned before, like, John Mechie was a fun idea that I would consider. I don't know whether that actually could even happen, but I think you could pay for him. Like, he's cheap for 2 more years and makes sense as your Z right now. You draft a receiver this year, and then next year you pay Higgins, and he's just on the market. And where do you think he wants to play? If he's not in Cincinnati, it's going to be Jacksonville. That's going to be one of the top options. So that's why I kind of separate them into 3 different groups, because T is more of a long-term play, and it's just, you're not giving up the pick. So then it's like, okay, is number 17 and number 48 for Rome worth not paying that 100 million extra over that time?
Yeah, and I gotta say, in this scenario, you're looking at a deep class of corners. You're looking at a deep class of interior defensive linemen. I personally think it's a deeper class than it's been talked about. You got guys like Dwayne Carter, Michael Hall, who I think is a perfect fit for us. Ruke Ororo. You got guys like Christian Boyd, who's projected to go day 3. So
Yeah.
if you're able to get off of 48 and 17 and get up to take Roma Dunze, you can get a corner like Renardo Green at 96 possibly. Even if you want to move up, you can go get them and move 116 and 96 and get into the 70s and go take Renardo Green. And you walk away with Roma Dunze and Renardo Green, and you take a D tackle and an offensive lineman in the 4th round, you might be able to walk away and say you won the draft.
For sure. And it's not a
So,
matter of like getting 10 different players for this team. It's a matter of getting, I think
impact.
maybe we talked about it was like 3 or 4 impact guys you want to shoot
Yeah.
for.
Yeah. You always want to walk away from the draft with at least 4 impact guys. If you walk away with more than 4, you deserve a raise. But to say 4, you want to walk away with 4 impact guys, that should be the standard. You want to walk away
Yeah.
with a hidden gem somewhere in the 5th or 6th round, which I know is not Trent's bag, but you just went and got your guy who is your draft advisor, who is known to help you get those guys. So I put it on Twitter that I'm expecting a great draft class. You bring your guys back into the system. You have 2 weeks to prepare for the draft. You have an understanding of what you want. You've used, I want to say they've used 17 out of 30 visits for out of state visits. So you still have your locals, and they're obviously searching the market for guys, bringing in that new tight end from Australia. So I'm expecting to get 4 guys. That's what I expect. I don't want to say 4 starters, but I expect to get 4 guys that are going to make impact plays or be in the rotation or get heavy reps.
Yeah, and that's a great expectation. And even if it seems like it's hard to hit that, you have to set the bar high because otherwise you get complacent and you pick Ventrell Miller in the 4th round when you have Chad Muma as your backup who can't even get on the field. And that's what happened last year. They told themselves, hey, we're fine. We don't got to do anything. They go pick a backup tight end over Torrance, who they very clearly needed a guard. And they interviewed him and were close to him throughout the cycle. And they just said, no, we don't feel like it. And not trying to disrespect Brendan Strange, but even if Strange was a great pick and a really good player, the value of that I don't think is even going to match what Torrance is going to be on the field in a couple of years. Just because you've got Ingram, and to have Strange start, you're basically saying, well, he's not going to be here long term. Strange is going to take his job eventually, and that's not what you want to see. Because I think Ingram is a vital part of this team, right? Maybe other players we can say that with. Going to the next one. Yeah, so we've got, I think there's a good chance Balky trades up and is aggressive this draft, considering he could get fired in the next year or two if he doesn't get his bleep together. I agree. Like, I think he has to be aggressive. It's a question of whether he can get deals done. We've seen throughout his time, he's very scared of giving up an amount of capital that he could lose out on. You look at how bad like the Calvin Ridley situation went, and it was still pretty well cost controlled, even in the nightmare scenario. Like, he still only gave up a 3rd and a 5th, and he got nothing in return. So the deals he makes, like, he's trying to protect himself. And so that's a little scary when we talk about being able to trade up for players. Like, what if Indianapolis says, okay, we're going to pay 15 and 46 or whatever they have in the 2nd round. I think it's actually later than our pick. And we're going to go get Roma Dunze, beat out our offer. And Balky says, I don't want to give up my 4th round pick. I'm just going to stay here. Like, that's kind of scary, but I do think he's going to try to trade up because he has to, and he has a lot of picks this year.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think the basis of a Roma Dunze deal at 8 should be 17 and 48 or next year's 2nd rounder, and then a 4th or 5th from this year or next year. You're going to give them at least 3 selections. You may give them one selection for next year, whether it be that second or that day 3 pick. But I think you have to get aggressive, especially with the way that the AFC South is moving. It's an arms race. You have to go out there and make the right moves, but also be in more of an urgent standpoint and understand that you're competing to run the future of the AFC South. Not for this year, for the next 4 years, the next 5
Yep.
years, the next 10 years. You want cornerstone guys. So if you're looking for a cornerstone in your receiving core, you understand that Christian Kirk is getting older. He's not in his 30s yet, but he's getting older. You still have to figure out whether you want to extend him in a year or two. You understand that Evan Ingram is 29, going on 30, and you have decisions to make about Travis Etienne in a year. So, what are you going to do? You have to go out there and get a franchise guy. And at this point, what has everybody been looking for? What have they suggested they're looking for? They should go and get a franchise guy at the wide receiver position. So that's my standpoint on it. I think they should trade about 3 selections for it. If they trade 4, it may seem like an overpay to us, but we don't know what the conversations will be unless we see some behind the scenes draft footage that show them having to outbid a Colts team or a Rams team, or anybody could be looking to move up.
Yeah, it could even be Buffalo setting a future first. Like
Exactly.
There's a lot of competition there. So I'm right there with you on it. And these 3 receivers at the top, whichever one you like the most, and it's probably Marvin Harrison Jr. for almost everyone. To get them, even if you got to pay a lot, it's not a move that you regret in a couple of years. It just doesn't happen. Like you're not like, damn man, why did we give up a 153 as well? I would rather just have these picks than Romo Dunze, who just had 1,400 yards in his rookie season, or whatever it is. Like, you don't regret that decision. And the track record for the Jaguars says that, well, these picks later will have value to other teams. The value to us is not as good because we are really bad at hitting on picks after. So, like, if I was doing the draft, maybe I'd care more about the later picks. I don't really care as much with the team because I know the players they're going to turn them into most of the time. And if you got to give up maybe one of those impact players you could have got this year, maybe it's 3 instead, to get Romo Dunze, that's fine. You're willing to pay that price, especially when it's a wide receiver heavy draft with a head coach that has not been a part of organizations that were good at taking receivers when he was there, and a GM that has taken one and he was an immediate bust, and his best pick otherwise was like Parker Washington, who's our backup. So it's kind of scary next year to look at that and try to get your wide receiver 1 because you want to draft it, or you're going to pay something ridiculous for your wide receiving core. So our next one is probably a pretty simple one to talk about. Jags trade up from 96 into the second. That's going to be really expensive. Like that's like almost all your day 3 picks.
Yeah,
like
that's pretty high.
I've looked at like what packages could be offered. I believe one, I have to check on the exact picks. It would be 96, one of 114 and 116, and then 153. If you do something like that, you're getting around 80, maybe into the 70s. So the jump that you make may not be worth it, especially when players at this point, like the amount of players at the top of your board that are getting taken, they get farther and farther apart as everyone differentiates their boards and they're going different directions. So it's kind of hard to trade up on that day unless you're like, okay, Renardo Green's here. I have an early second round grade on him. I got to make my move. And I would do that if I'm Jacksonville, especially if you go get Romo Dunze and Green is sitting there in the early 80s. I'm jumping in front of other teams and I'm getting him. But I don't think they can move into the second realistically. I'm not even sure if all their draft capital for this year would do it. It would be like a third, a fourth, and your future third to move into the second round. Maybe not the fourth, but it'd be costly.
Yeah, that's that's a super hot fire take. Like I don't think it's unrealistic per se. Like you could make a move like that, but is Trent Baalke that aggressive with his assets? From what
Hell
we've
no.
seen, he's not. So I do not expect that. I do not expect that type of jump unless a guy starts falling. He's at 85. You have to jump a team like the Colts, or you have to jump a team that you're expecting to play this year. If you think he's an impact guy, or you have a first round grade on him, or an early second round grade, and he falls to the late second round, and you're like, I got to go up and get him. I just don't. I don't. I don't expect him to do that. And the only player that we've seen him be that aggressive for was Ventrell Miller, and it was at a position that wasn't a need. It was just a guy that he
Yeah.
liked, and he ended up getting him later. So
And he was jumping less spots, and it was later in the draft. So this would be far bigger. Like he would need to have someone ranked as like a very early second round prospect or a late first, I think, to where he would be saying, okay, well, I can give up that future third and make this move. And
yeah,
it could just be saying, I mean, he says 96 here, but you could also just give up a future second and move into the late second round, because we've seen teams do that thinking next year's pick is going to be better. You look at our trade with the Saints. We traded 127 last year to get 227 in that draft, and now we got 114 out of it. So we completely
yeah,
won the trade. So teams would take that deal, but I don't think 96 would be realistic. So our next one here, this is spicy, and I got to provide context to it. J.C. Latham is offensive tackle 2, and it is not close. The first part's fine. It's the second part where you're immediately asking, okay, are we disrespecting Joe Alt or are we disrespecting Olu Fashanu? And the guy we're disrespecting here is Olu Fashanu. That I think he likes him, but he's like his third prospect. So, what are your thoughts on J.C. Latham? I'll defer to you for that.
yeah. For me, for Latham, I think he is a starting caliber right tackle. For me, I don't have him as a higher graded player than Olu. I think Olu is going to be a left tackle for you. He could potentially be a franchise left tackle if you continue to work with him in the run game. He has similar issues to Cam Robinson. He definitely has that dog in him. I think he has the motor. He has the length. I think I have him graded higher. Uh, he also has the pedigree. He's been a heavily high mocked player for a long time. He's proven it, and the guy the guy is a monster. For me, J.C.
Yeah.
Latham, he's a technician. I think you want him at that right tackle spot. If we were to select him and move Anton to the left, I would not be upset. But if you're selecting him over Olu, I don't think it's the right move. You go for your bookend tackles and you go for length, you go for, pass protection, and you go out and get those guys that can really maul. You know, for me, I more so would want pass protectors at the left and right tackle spot. I love the technician and the power that Anton brings. So I would want to get a guy that kind of reminisces that on the other side. Both of those guys have to work in the run game, but if you have guys that are maulers at guard, your run game can still survive. So for me, I still
Yeah.
have Olu higher, but I think JC is a very good right tackle in the NFL, possibly a top 15 right tackle when he steps on the field.
He's a good player, but I do think with him, what scares me is there are a lot of people who think there's bust potential there, and you can see a
Hmm.
little bit of it on film. So I
Yeah.
get scared picking him even over like Fuanga. I gotta remember there's an N in there. Um, yeah, they're kind of similar prospects. They're big guys who move pretty well, and they might need to kick in a guard to the next level. Except Latham's bigger. But I agree. Like with talking about Olu, like I do think he's already a better prospect. But then you talk about how he fits Jacksonville. Like if this is a Jacksonville Jaguars centric take, which it's more so talking about the big board in general without weighting needs and like the scheme you run.
Mhm.
Olu is as perfect of a fit I think as you can get. And there's
Yeah.
also the possibility that he slides down the board because people are like, oh, he's got small hands. And I said that personally. I got to call myself out on that. In my offensive tackle rankings, I had him much lower. And so I regret that personally because I've been high on him throughout the whole process. Other than that, he's a good player, though. He's a great pass protector. There's the way he can recover from losing initially on a rep is unlike anyone I've ever seen. Like, you just don't see him continue to lose reps. He will anchor, he'll do a hop step, he'll do whatever he has to do. He's a very good player. There's a lot of room for error because of his ability to recover, and he's a technician. He's a very good one now. And so it's just a question of can you improve in the run game, which is a very small part of Jacksonville's offense, which I don't like. I wish we ran the ball more. But for what they want to do, Olu is like the perfect fit. You have Anton you can kick over to the left, and then maybe in the future, your right guard, you're getting someone who's maybe a tackle prospect who kicks inside. And then now you've got these plans for if players go out where you can still produce at a high level. I really like Olu, but JC Latham he's technically offense tackle 3 for me because I have Fuanga as a guard, but they're both really high prospects. They're like early teens for me, and I would agree he's a good player, but saying it isn't close is crazy. Now they're the swag on the players isn't close. Like JC Latham just looks freaking awesome. I don't know if you ever seen pictures of him or anything, but yeah, he looks like a certified badass. Like he's gonna kill people on the field. But yeah, no disrespect to Olu in that, but I would disagree with this take. I think Latham's good, but I don't think he's number 2 here. So our next one, we've got 5 left here. This is a fun one. We talked about Dallas Turner a little bit, but we'll just hit on if we think they would take him. He's saying we will take edge if Dallas Turner is available. Now, I'm assuming this is at pick 17. I don't know if they trade up. If they do, I'll actually support it because I think Turner's a great prospect, and I'm not going to be bothered by it because they need depth at all these positions. They could use a rotation. They might even have more on the interior in depth than pass rush, arguably, because Travis Gibson is your 3rd guy. Dwan Smoot's not back. They need to re-sign him because there's no reason to let him walk for what he's going to get paid. So Dallas Turner would be a phenomenal fit at 17, I think. I think he'd be a really good player, and I saw him mocked at Jacksonville earlier today on the Goat House's channel, which is a great channel if you're looking for more draft content and regular season content. But I think they would probably take it because of the value of edge rusher and the intangibles too.
Oh yeah, if he's top 10 on their board and he falls to 17, Trent Baalke is a big guy on sticking to the board. You know, you sit there and watch the hunt, or you watch any type of interview in regards to the draft, and he's going to tell you, we're sticking to the board. We're not deferring from it. We're not deferring from anything for any idea of what you think you might need or what you think might be the best player available. What the board is the board. So if he's a top 10 guy for them or a top 7 guy, and he's there at 17, they might run to the podium. And I'm not necessarily mad at it. I do have him as my edge 1. Do I think we need to take the edge 1 in this NFL draft to go to the next level? Not personally. I am up the camp to go and get Trevor his support. But I would not be upset about it. I would definitely think we would have one of the best defensive lines in the NFL. So, you know, the defensive line wins games. So I'm in support of it. If he's there at 17, you run the card up, respectively.
And the exciting thing about that, too, for me is that, like, a week ago, if you told me the Jaguars would take Dallas Turner, which we obviously don't know right now, but if I knew that a week ago, I would be scared because I would love the pick, but I'd be like, well, crap. Like, are we moving on from Josh? But now he's locked up. Trayvon is a former first overall pick. Even if they have a hard time in contract negotiations, they're going to do what they have to get it done down the road. So this is, well, it's not the biggest position of need. There's a very strong argument for it because you get to be possibly the most talented team on as far as edge rushers in the NFL if Turner is what you think he is, and it's cost controlled for quite a while. And by the time Turner is earning more money, that contract is over with Josh Allen. He's not going to be looking for those huge paydays necessarily. Maybe he takes a big pay, if he's playing great. He probably will be. But it's cost controlled at a really important position, and you can always make the argument for best player available as long as they can get on the field, especially when you look back at how Josh Allen was picked. We talked about this last week when he got extended, talking about, like, do you reach for positions of need? If the great player lines up with a position of need, you try to go for it, right? That's why we talk about Rome Odunze. That's why we talk about Malik Neighbors. Those are great picks because they fill both of those. But what if the Jaguars in 2019 said, well, Josh Allen is in the big position of need. We need a tight end. Let's get TJ Hawkinson. Well, Hawkinson would be great. And maybe they'd feel this way taking a wide receiver or a cornerback. Say they take Kool-Aid there, who I think will be really good too. But then Dallas Turner ends up being great. They're going to regret it. Imagine if we skipped Josh Allen to get Hawkinson, who is a very good player, but doesn't have the same value. So there's consequences, right? Like immediately, because you don't get a position of need necessarily, and he probably doesn't play a ton right off the bat. But I think the long-term investment, which is what really matters, and how you're going to beat out teams like Houston that are just spending these ridiculous amounts of money, this is how you win. You draft well, and this is one of the ways you draft well, because you get a player who's above your 17th overall grade. So I mean, what do you think about that? Like, would you be what would you be what would your reaction be from like 1 to 10 if we take Dallas Turner, if he's the best player on the board?
If he's the best player on the board, and say there's a run with this case, there has to be a run on receiver or corner, right?
Yeah, let's say Quignon and Terrion are gone. 80's like top receiver, and then Kool-Aid's there.
So yeah, I mean, I would either talk about trading down if you're not enamored, if the Jacksonville Jaguars are not enamored with Dallas Turner, I would talk about trading down, or just taking the selection and picking Dallas Turner. Now it depends on what their board is. Now if you have him lower and you have Verse and Latu higher, you have him as a top 20 guy, and he's sitting there, he's kind of like in your 17 to 20 range. You say, well, he fits where we're at on the board, but do we have him as a higher potential player than Kool-Aid? And is it a bigger need? Is it the value meeting the need? But you have Kool-Aid in the same range. Say you have him up one position higher. You have him at 17, Turner's at 18. You take Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on what their board is and what they're meeting, if they're going to meet the value at the selection. So
for sure.
If there's a run on corner, you might go Turner. Because Kool-Aid could go before 17 too if there's a run on corner. If 3 guys go and you're sitting there and nobody's really selecting the edge defenders, you walk away with Turner as a consolation prize, and you address receiver and corner on day 2. I don't really see a way to complain about that. So I would probably give it an 8 rating. I wouldn't be ecstatic like a 10, but I would be happy and say, okay, we can build on this. We have the trenches solidified, especially if somebody were to go down. If somebody were to go down, I pray to God that Josh Allen or Travon Walker were not to get hurt. But if somebody were to go down, it would devastate this defense.
We'd be dead. That would be the end of the year, most likely. It'd be like when the Steelers lost TJ Watt. I don't remember what their record was, but I know they fell off a cliff as far as their defense and how they were playing. And I agree. Like, a lot of it depends on what your big board looks like, because maybe say Turner's 10 for you and you have a player at 12, and you can move down with the team and get the player at number 12. You could do that, right? If they're a better position of need. But let's take a scenario where Turner's number 10 on my board. That's roughly where he is right now. And then Brian Thomas Jr. is the next highest rated prospect that I think I can get, and that's moving back maybe to 23 or something. Maybe the Patriots trade for 11 and 23 with the Vikings. They want to move up for a player. If I'm doing that, then I have to think, okay, I'm jumping, say, down to Brian Thomas Jr., who is ranked around that range. That's like 13 spots worth of value I'm moving down, and I'm only getting paid for having moved 6 spots. So it's not worth it. So it really depends on like how close other prospects are, because sometimes you can maybe even stay there and say, okay, this guy is maybe just slightly worse, but he's so much bigger of a need that we take it. That's where need comes in. But you don't want it to make your decisions for you as the primary factor.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and
Especially that's why I bring up the scenario if they have Turner lower than a lot of people expect, and they have Kool-Aid a lot higher. I think they really value him as a press man corner. There's been a lot of talk about them really loving the Alabama corners. So
yeah,
if they have Kool-Aid as a top 15 guy, which is not unheard of, I've seen people have Kool-Aid ranked that high. If he's your number 2 or number 3, wherever you have him and Arnold, if they're right up there with Turner, you might talk to the Eagles that may need another edge rusher and say, hey, just give us an extra third, or hey, just give us a selection next year and give us your fourth this year. I
yeah,
wouldn't be mad at that. And you go select Kool-Aid, or you go select AD Mitchell, or whoever is whoever you're enamored with. We saw that last year with Anton Harrison. It's not unheard of for them to do this. We saw this last year. They traded down twice in the first one. So if there's a guy that they're really enamored with, and they think he's higher on the board than other people, and they say, well, the other guy's consensus, he's supposed to go in the teens. He's still here. We don't want him. We have him ranked a little bit lower, but our guy, whoever it is, whether it be Kool-Aid or an Anton, not an Anton, but an AD or a Brian Thomas Jr., you say, hey, let's go trade down with the Eagles or the Dolphins. They want their guy Dallas Turner. Let's
yeah.
go do it.
Yep, right. I'm right there with you on it. I think that's definitely good thinking. Now, this next one is the one I know you will not be a fan of, which is AD Mitchell will be mid. Nate Wiggins, well, that's the part I know you definitely won't like. Nate Wiggins will fall to day 2. They're 12 plus starting quality interior offensive line, and then fourth, most of the edge rushers are mid. So we might kind of rapid fire this. We've gone a little over already, and this could be like an hour long conversation since it's 4 of them. But I'm gonna let you defend AD Mitchell because that's your thing. So, and I'll agree with your thoughts anyway.
Yeah, for AD Mitchell, I have him as my wide receiver 4 in this draft cycle. To me, he is one of the better route runners in the class. If you want to say where he ranks as a route runner, he might be that wide receiver 4 in terms of route running. Um, I think he has some of the best get off. He's able to win over the top, similar to an X receiver, but he can be a Z. I think he has scheme versatility. He has the route tree. He has the speed, the 4.3 speed. You compare him to a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. I've seen a lot of people say faster, stronger, bigger. And Brian Thomas Jr. is a few centimeters bigger. He only has maybe 5 pounds on him.
It's like
And
everything's almost identical. It's just
yeah,
barely better for
yeah,
Brian Thomas Jr. in every single metric.
exactly. So, to compare their measurables, it doesn't really equate to what you say is the difference in value. So if you have Brian Thomas Jr. as your wide receiver 4, or wherever they may have them ranked personally, you go with the guy that's the better route runner, the more sure thing, and he has the better hands. Point blank, period. You look at the film, when you compare the two, Brian Thomas Jr. played with the potential QB2 in the draft. Who did Adane play with? Quinn Ewers, who underthrew the ball in nearly every big game.
Yeah, he was not great this year.
So a lot of the stuff that you see, you watch the film, AD Mitchell is open 70% of the time, and he can play X and Z, and he can be what you wanted from Calvin Ridley on a cheap contract. He has the size, he has the speed, and he's a game breaker. This guy can be a game breaker for you at wide receiver 4. You go with the value. If he's there at 17 and you don't have a guy ranked higher on your board, you run it up to the podium. If you can't make the
Yeah,
deal happen for Rome Odunze, you take the deal. You go and get a Dine.
it's a great pivot for sure. My only concern is like, depending on where you have him on your board, you might be able to move back and have him at your most valuable position on your draft board. You might already have him at that 17. For me, he's like 23, which is not a ton of separation between everyone, and he might move up a little bit before draft time. But the problem, I think, for getting him, if it's not 17, is that a team like Buffalo probably moves up. A team before us might take Brian Thomas Jr. just saying, dude, this guy's measurements are insane. We got to draft him. And they choose him over AD Mitchell. So I don't even know if you can move down if you want Mitchell. I think you've almost got to stay there at 17. So like the mock drafts where people are saying, okay, well, we move back to 28 with Buffalo or 27 with Arizona, and then we pick him and just win the draft and have all these extra picks. I think that would backfire to move down that far. I think you would miss out on him, and then you'd probably get into your next tier of guys where, like, I like the guy, but maybe Graham Barden's your top guy. And now it's a different level from what you had with AD Mitchell and your other guys in that tier at 17 and the picks coming right after. So I like him. And I think, like, the floor, the absolute floor for Mitchell is to be mid. And that's not bad either. I think, like, the worst case scenario is every year you feel like, man, he gives us flashes, but he's just not there. Because that's kind of what he was in college with your worst description of him as a player, if you're giving him the least you can. So I think that's the worst it turns out, but I think he's probably going to turn out to be a good player. There's just some risk involved because he never had that 1,000-yard season. Of course, the only opportunity to do that was Texas because Georgia's a run offense and they're very heavy on that. So Mitchell didn't really get a shot, but you can argue Mitchell is worth more than that very easily, especially when you talk about Quinn Ewers, who I don't think was a good quarterback for him to have, and playing with Trevor Lawrence would be a whole nother world for Mitchell. Now,
Talking my language.
Yeah, for sure. These next guys, Nate Wiggins falling to day 2. I don't think that happens just because of the speed, and then he has some good length. I don't think he has great arm length, but some team will probably love it, and they'll pick him in the late first and either get a steal or be very sorely disappointed in the future. I'm personally out on Wiggins just because of how light he measured. It just feels like he's going the Emmanuel Forbes route, and I don't know why. Especially when you got Quinyon Mitchell, who ran half a tenth slower, and he did it at 22, 23 pounds heavier. So I didn't really like that with Wiggins. I'm not a huge fan of him now at this point, but I do think he'll get snagged right at the end of the first.
Yeah, I haven't been a Nate Wiggins believer this whole process. I've been quoted to be the biggest hater of Nate Wiggins, but I'm not. I'll never sit here and be a detriment to a guy. I believe he has a bright future, but I don't think it'll be with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Uh, I don't see him being this elite press man guy. Has to be an off zone scheme, and it's going to be a team that values true speed at the position. I think you could say he goes to the Packers. I think that's a likely selection. I think it'll be another bust for them compared to what they did with Eric Stokes. I just don't see a complete landing spot where he turns into a star like a lot of people project just because of the speed. His long speed is great. He has great recovery, solid hips. He's able to move fluidly and track the ball, but so I don't see the dog. I don't see a lot of the stuff that the intangibles that you expect from a corner with that speed and that ability. And he doesn't have the length or the physicality as a tackler which we've seen a lot on film. So to me, I wouldn't be mad at this suggestion. I think it is a mid take if we were to make a play on words. I
Sure.
think he could fall to day two, and I don't think that's unheard of if people aren't in love with his ability to tackle. But I think he could go in the late 20s. I don't think a team like the Chiefs or anybody in the 30s will take him, but he could go to the Panthers at 39. I don't think that's absurd.
There's that too. The Cardinals, maybe. I don't know what kind of scheme they run though, and maybe Kool Aid falls to them for all we know. We really can't predict what players fall on draft day. There will be someone. That'll probably be the way Arizona goes because they've actually been pretty good about taking best player off the board.
Hmm.
They got Ojulari, for example, last year in like the early to mid second. I've actually been a pretty big fan of some of the stuff that they've been doing with all that. But yeah, I mean, Wiggins is. I don't think he should go day one. He's below Renardo Green for me at this point, and by a bit. But I could see him going first day. I could see him going second day. It's 50-50 maybe. As far as the interior offensive linemen, I don't think there's that many because I'm pretty sure when I did my rankings, I even include guys like Fuanga in there, and then I had Zinter like towards the end of it, and Zinter's kind of like around where it stops for me. So maybe some names sneak in that I'm not high on, like McCormick, for example. But I don't think we get to 12, especially with how poorly it feels like offensive linemen translate to the NFL. They just don't play as good as you expect, and a lot of the time it's a disaster. To where like Anton Harrison was the best tackle last year, even though like he didn't have a perfect year. He started out pretty bad and he didn't grade out great. I still think he did fine. I think he's a good and he's a plus, but he beat out everyone just doing that, and it was questionable. So I don't think the interior offensive line class ends up being that strong. That would be impressive, and I would be praying we got one of those players if that's the case, and one of the good starters too.
Yeah, I don't know if I have 12 plus starting caliber interior O linemen. There's some real sleepers. Obviously, Mason McCormick is a big name that's been popping off recently with a lot of love from Brett Coleman and Jordan DeLugo, respectively. I think there are some sleepers. There are some great guys in this class on the interior. JPJ Jackson Powers Johnson is a big name that I was an advocate for. I think he'll be possibly the best interior offensive lineman. If not, Christian Haynes is a great one that I think would
Yeah.
be a good selection in the second round for us. But 12 plus starting caliber interior offensive lineman, I don't know if that's realistic.
Yeah, that'd be a better take, I think, with like receivers to say there's going to be however many. But the offensive lineman, it's always a hard bet, even though that's a pretty solid class with some good players. You can't predict that many most of the time, and if he's right, that's really impressive. But just my opinion on it. And then as far as the edge rushers, I think there's some really good ones at the top, and then the class kind of dies down, and you get some sneaky ones like Marshawn Nealon's, for example. I think Chris Braswell is a good player. Don't think he's great, but I think he's good. He'd be a good rotational piece and can start. But the top, like, I don't think they'll be best of the best, but I do think they'll be good pros. I think every single one of them will succeed. Talking about Turner, Verse, and Latu. So I don't think they're mid. I think the depth is very mid, if not worse. But I think, like, I guess I would agree with that in that case because it's most of the edge rushers. So if you're saying after the top 3 or 4, if you include Robinson, sure, I could understand that.
I'm gonna have to disagree. I think it is a solid class. I don't think it's mid. I think it's solid. I think it's a solid class. When you start shooting off names, you bring up Darius Robinson, who also has inside outside versatility. You
Yep.
have guys like Brandon Dorless, inside outside versatility. You have, what am I thinking of? Jonah Ellis, NFL pedigree. A lot of family has played in or is in the NFL. You know, Adisa Isaac is a solid player that played across from Chop Robinson. I have a second round grade on Chop Robinson. I don't know what your grade is on him, but I
Second
think he's a
round as
solid
well.
player. Yeah, Chop Robinson, I think he's a second round guy. Um, you get into the middle of the class, there are some guys still out there that could be out there and impactful guys that you can take in the third round. So if you're getting to the third round and you still have impact guys, I think it's a solid class. Now, I think there are guys you could take in the fifth round and they can be Pro Bowlers? No, but it's not an elite class of edge rushers. It's a solid
Yeah,
class. I don't think it's mid.
I think maybe where we would disagree and why we disagree is because I'd consider solid as mid, but I'm pretty close with you on that. Like the players after the first round, there's some sleepers, there's some good ones. There's even guys like Jalix Hunt. You've even got
Yes.
like hype about Muhammad Kamara. I've got to. Those are two I've got to look back at before the draft, but there's some stuff down there, but there's not that top player that's elite. And then there's
No.
not a ton into day two that's great, is like good there. I think Chop Robinson's the one that might be great, that group, unless Robinson falls.
Yeah, I
But
think
yeah,
Robinson could
it's
be a star.
it's kind of average, I would say. You could go around that. It's pretty close to the middle. Now, we've got three more, and some of these, I know the next one gets to be not as much draft related, but this one is that the Jaguars will trade the 17th pick on draft day to the 49ers for Ayuk. He also talks about Caleb Williams having similar struggles in Chicago because of weather, non-offensive head coach, not enough offensive talent overall. I disagree with that.
Disagree.
Also, it continues to show that every quarterback needs offensive head coach and weapons as a rookie. On the Caleb Williams thing, which we'll talk about very shortly, and then hit more on Ayuk maybe. I think he could struggle. I would probably project he struggles, but I think they absolutely have talent around him, and there's the possibility they could just be incredible this year. Because what if they end up being the team that gets Rome Odunze? What if they get the top edge rusher at their pick and they like complete their roster in a lot of these ways? Then Chicago is one of the better teams, and they could have a winning record. They took a big step last year. People forget about that because they're picking first overall, which isn't even their pick. They were winning a lot of games late in the season, and they had a shot to make the playoffs, and then they kind of died down at the last moment. So I think they could be
Yeah.
really good. I think they could also suck. Caleb Williams will probably have moments and still struggle. Not as bad as Lawrence, perhaps, who was basically left to die, but he'll struggle, I would say.
Yeah, I think he'll show some struggles probably in the first 3 to 4 games. Obviously, you're adjusting to a new offense, you're adjusting to new players, you're getting used to what players, from your receiver to your running back, what their tendencies are, understanding what your offensive line is comfortable doing, what the zone scheme is for the pass blocking. You're kind of just getting a feel for what's happening in the offense. And you're not going to expect a first year quarterback to be able to just maneuver and do everything like he's Peyton Manning and tell guys where they're supposed to be on the dot. He's got to learn the offense once he gets that playbook and gets selected by the Bears. I think it'll be a solid rookie season. Do I expect an all time rookie season? No, I don't. I think he has the weapons
Yeah.
to support him, but I agree with the sense that he's gonna have a defensive head coach who's not gonna be able to be this mastermind of a play caller. And I don't remember off the top of my head who their offensive coordinator is, but I remember seeing comments that they weren't truly inspired by it. So I don't expect for there to be a bunch of mastery. I expect a lot of improvisation from Williams. Uh, I think they have solid tackles between Wright and Braxton Jones, but they have to continue to develop. And you have veterans at wide receiver and tight end, but you know, are he gonna is he gonna be able to get the ball to them in time? So, and they don't really have support in the run game, similar to the Jags. They don't have a star running back that can just make plays out of nowhere like an ETN. So it's going to be interesting. I think he'll have his struggles in the first 4 games, like I said, but I don't think he'll look like a bust like Bryce Young looked during the first half of last season.
Yeah, he won't be that bad. I think he'll struggle, but I think you'll still know, hey, he's the franchise guy, and it's going to get
Yeah.
better, and he'll be. I don't think there's going to be any questions at the end of the day on him being a good player in the NFL. As far as Ayuk, if no one else was bidding on him, then sure, I could agree. Like if it's just Jacksonville and San Francisco talking, then maybe they do pull off the move because they're desperate for that receiver. But I think even if they want him now, they're going to get outbid by someone because they'll try to play the price the best they can, and then they'll send in a low ball offer, and it won't be good enough. And there will be a team that will offer more than them. Maybe Pittsburgh does that, for example. Maybe Buffalo does that. So I don't think it'll happen, but I think the idea that they're going to try to get a trade done on draft day, especially if they don't get up for Odunze, yeah, that could be an option. And maybe it is right now in their contingency plans to say, okay, if we don't get one of these top three, we don't trust the rest of the guys enough, and we're going to go get someone we trust, but is going to cost us a pretty penny, and just try to, in the future, build our team the best we can through the draft and understand our cap situation isn't that great anymore. Because it definitely won't be that good paying a top receiver a bunch of money again.
Yeah, it'll definitely kill a little bit of the momentum that we have for next offseason, to go out there and make some splashes as well as retain the guys we want, like Cisco and Campbell and ETN. And if you want to extend a Walker Little, I'm not sure if they want to. You could give them a 2-year deal with a 1 year out, basically saying prove it, and we'll see if we give you another extension. But you have some cornerstone guys potentially. I think Cisco is a cornerstone on the defense. I think
Agreed.
ETN is a cornerstone in the offense. I think, you don't obviously want to pay a running back, give them an overpay, but I think ETN deserves a paycheck. Campbell, I need to see what he does this season. I think he's the only big question mark among the big four. For Walker, he's got to find a role, man. I think swing tackle is obviously a valuable position in the NFL. Tackles go out left and right, but I don't mean that to be a pun in itself, but he's got to find a role somewhere. I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, if he's the future at right guard and they figure that out, and he's able to really hone in on his craft this offseason and learn guard, hey, you've got your guy at guard going forward, and maybe he earns an extension after the season. You move on from Scherf. But they've got to find some way to figure out what they're going to do.
I think Walker Little is probably just gone after this year. I think even if they wanted to extend him, he's just going to say no because they've played with him so much. Like,
Yeah.
even if whether or not he's deserved a starting job or not, he's never at any point been considered as an option to start unless someone went down. And I'm telling you right now, there were teams out there that would start Walker Little at left tackle. Why not the Commanders, for example? They need infrastructure around Jaden Daniels when they pick him. I think that will be the pick. Walker Little would make a ton of sense. They just released Charles Leno. They need another player on that offensive line, and Little has experience, and he's cheap. You even talk about the Saints as maybe a team that wants to just get an insurance policy in case their guy isn't there at 14. Or if they just want to go in another direction, maybe, replace... I hate that I'm forgetting the name of their defensive end that's been there forever. It's like Cam something or... Yeah. But,
Cam Jordan?
Cam Jordan, yeah. You got it. Thank you. They're going to have to replace him at some point, so maybe they would consider that. But Walker Little he has no value to the coaching staff beyond being a swing tackle, and that's a player who can be more than a swing tackle, because whether or not you want him as your ideal starter, I think with how bad the league is at tackle that he's a top 32 left tackle, for sure. I don't even think that's much of a debate. He's generally graded out really well, especially as a pass blocker. He's done good on film. This last year, When he got moved to guard, it all fell in. And he didn't play well there. They moved him out to tackle. He didn't play well again. I think at this point, like, if they wanted him to have a future, they trade Cam and they'd say, hey, man, we're going to give you this year to be the left tackle. You deserve this opportunity, and we're going to see how things go, and maybe you're a guy of the future. But you're going to get your shot. There's no one here who's going to steal your job in the middle of the season because they're coming back from injury or suspension. And you just be done with it. But, yeah, they're weird with Walker Little. It's been very confusing. And if they wanted to learn what they had in him, would have been so much smarter to do it last year, especially because I'm pretty sure Cam Robinson's guarantees were voided to an extent because of that suspension. We'd heard something about how the contract language would allow Jacksonville to move on from him. So I don't get what they were doing there, but I think they gotta Hooper get off the pod and make a decision on his future. And it needs to come quickly after the draft, in my opinion. I get if they want to wait and see if they get Fashanu or someone like that. Now, this is our non-draft take that we got. We'll still talk about it. But it's that Trayvon Walker will lead the NFL in sacks, and he'll only beat Josh Allen by half a sack. So, combined over 35. So, what he's saying, just to put this in layman's terms, is that the Jaguars will have the top 2 pass rushers in the league, and Trayvon Walker will be the best one. I'm not there. I'm a fan of Trayvon Walker. I think he's going to play better in this scheme. I do actually think, despite that, he will probably have a couple less sacks, and he'll still play better in general. But I know a lot of people outside of Jacksonville, and they're kind of biased, to be honest, have said, well, those 10 sacks, he kind of just walked ass backwards into them. And I think that's partially true and partially not. And so I think he'll be a better player, but I don't think he's going to lead the league, let alone go past his mark from last year. And I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong, but that's where I see him. I think that's a very bold take and maybe a bit of a homer take.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a homer take. I do have Trevon projected to get about 13 next year.
Yeah.
I think him going for, say, to lead the league in sacks was probably going to be, say, this year it was 19 or 20. So you're projecting that he's going to be a 19 sack guy. That's a really big jump. Like, he's got to, Nielsen has to be the guru of all gurus, and he's going to get a head coach job if it happens. So
Can we note for a moment that they're probably going to split a lot of sacks as well, because you're going to have Armstead now. Hamilton should be fully healthy. Josh Allen's going to be there. We might even take another pass rusher early in this draft, whether on interior or on the edge. There's other people who are competing for this too, so I think the team's going to get a lot more. But I don't think Trayvon Walker is going to be out there leading the whole team in that. I think Josh Allen is the better player and will continue to be the better player throughout their entire careers. Doesn't mean I don't think Trayvon Walker will be good, but Allen is that great of a player.
Yeah, currently my over-under for both of them, I think Josh gets over-under 15, and I think Trevon gets over-under probably 12.5. So I think he could get 13 plus, but I really hope that he gets at least 11 to 12. If you get a little bit improvement here, a little bit improvement there, and Josh stays in that 15-plus sack range, it's a productive season. And you have guys that'll continue to help and contribute. If Eric comes in and gives you 7 to 9, and Devon gives you 4, and Tyler Lacey gives you 3, and you have another draft pick comes in and gives you 5, and you still have Travis Gibson that can come in and give you 3 or 4. You want everybody to eat. You want
and they're all
better pass rushing rooms. So it's gonna be possible for Trevon to do that. I think he could turn into that type of monster. I think he has that type of potential, but I don't think we'll see it until year 4.
Yeah, year 4 is a good benchmark. I agree with that too. I think the over-under here of 35 is even a little high if we're talking about half sacks counting as full sacks. So theoretically there could be 2 on a single play because it's Allen and Walker getting involved. I think the over-under, if we're going by half sacks being an option, is probably 25. I think Josh Allen will play great again. I don't know if he gets 17 and a half per se. I'd set it closer to 15, 16. And Walker I'd set around 9 or 10, which might be high compared to even like the out of building consensus. Not among the fan base, but just in general, how people see him, because he's hated, man. Like, people despise him. Anytime they talk about him on a show, they just have like a panic attack and like, he sucks. He's worse than Aiden, and they won't. It's not even like the conversation at hand, but he's very much overhated. He's not overrated at all.
Yeah,
other than this take,
it's despicable at this point.
Yeah, they'll never change their mind. So our final one here, and this is the one I'm going to have to disagree with the most. Brian Thomas Jr. ends up being a better pro than Neighbors. And I left this for last because of that reason, because I think this is the hottest take of them all, or at least tied with the Trayvon Walker one. And I just say that because I think Neighbors is going to be the next big receiver. And so for Brian Thomas Jr. to even be the same would be like the highest end outcome for him. So for that chance to happen, it's like, okay, that's as likely as maybe Trayvon Walker having like him lead the league in sacks. You know, I think Brian Thomas Jr. could be good. I think he gets too much hate. I think people just look at him, they're like, that's Quentin Johnston, and then just throw him in the trash. And that's really unfair to him. He has things he needs to work on. He hasn't played a ton, but a team putting him in the right situation will probably have a good pro down the road, just not one that's better than Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think this is a really, really hot take. Like, best hot sauce in the city hot take. You know,
house is burning down.
Yeah, house is burning down hot take. I think Brian, to me, he's my wide receiver 5. I've been very vocal about this. I think he has great potential. On the high end, I think he's maybe like a DK Metcalf type.
Really?
But yeah, I think that's really on the high end.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to look into that one. Can you explain that actually, real quick? I'm curious. Not that I'm trying to disagree with you, but I have not heard that from anyone.
Yeah, for me, you know, when you look at the areas of the field where they win at, he predominantly wins on the fade routes. You know, going straight down the line, going sideline to sideline. You know, the guy is not really the biggest route breaker that you would say. He doesn't necessarily win at the top of his routes, but he wins over the top at the catch point. So, you know, when you look at a guy like DK Metcalf, where does he win at? On those go routes, on those fades, and over at the catch point. You know, when he's able to really show off his athleticism and just beat a guy and run down the field and blaze him. So that's what I see from Brian Thomas Jr. You know, you see the 4.33 blazing speed. You know, the guy is a physical freak. You know, that's what everybody's been talking about and clamoring about and saying, like, this is the type of athlete you want in your room. But is he a Stephon Diggs type receiver in terms of route running? Nowhere near it. You know, I think the guy has a lot of potential. I think he could work his way into being a solid route runner. But just looking at the areas of the field where they win at, I think he can win on slant routes similar to DK, and be able to show off that speed, catching the ball on the run. But that's my high end comparison for him.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. So you're kind of saying the way they play the game is the same, not necessarily that like their builds are the same, because obviously Metcalf is a physical specimen in very different ways. I feel like looking at Brian Thomas Jr., he's almost like the JJ McCarthy of the wide receivers. Like he obviously succeeded last year, but we have not seen enough from him. The potential sky high, and it comes down to how does the team develop him. If I just keep it that generalized, I would say they're kind of similar for their own positions. But Brian Thomas Jr., he's got to go to the right situation. And funny enough, like, I mean, I wouldn't take him to Jacksonville unless he just fell off a cliff on draft day and we were getting him at the end of the first. But I do think it would actually be a really good situation because I think you could at least give him a decent amount of targets. You've got Evan Ingram, you've got Christian Kirk, and you hope Gabe Davis is consistent. And I will give them their chance with Gabe Davis because while I didn't like the signing and I once have done it, I do trust them with their free agency choices at receiver. I think they've earned that trust based off what they did with Christian Kirk and what they did with Zay Jones at least the first year before the injuries just started piling up. And obviously now he's getting to be older. So I would trust them to maybe be able to develop him. But it would not be my ideal scenario because I think by the time you're getting the impact you want, then you're going to have to pay him. Right, so you're not getting like those years of what you will with Malik Neighbors here, where you're going to pay him, 7-8 million, whatever the rookie number is, and he's playing like he's the best receiver in the NFL. That's where I think a lot of the difference comes, and where the value is going to be very different. Maybe at the very end of their careers, like maybe Neighbors falls off faster, but overall, I think he's got him beat by quite a bit, unless Thomas just has the perfect NFL career. So that's what we've got for all our hot takes. We finally got through it. It didn't take us 3 hours like I thought it was going to at first. But there's some very interesting ones. I think there's some that I would generally agree with. Maybe aren't as hot as what I expected. But we don't know what to expect, man. Like it's going to be a crazy draft. There's going to be players going at spots we don't think. We've all got our opinions now, and it'll be fun to see down the road what was right, what was wrong, how close were we. That's always a fun evaluation, looking back on it.
For sure.
So do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this up? I think I'm good personally.
Yeah, just want to thank everybody for commenting and giving their hot takes. Thank you for the engagement and giving us an opportunity to do a video like this. You can follow me on all socials at 90210 Toriano. That's TORIONO. And thank you, Jacob, for allowing me to get on again.
Yeah, not a problem. It's fun, especially with Draft Talk, because we're both very much into it. Like, I'm going to personally do summer scouting this year, and people are going to call me a sicko for it, but I love the draft. It's my favorite thing, NFL related, honestly, as dumb as that may sound. If you do want to follow Toriano, though, he is on the screen there on the right in the relevant people under my Twitter. So he's a great follow, especially for draft content, even just funny things regarding the Jaguars and general takes. We have a good time on Twitter. It's definitely a community that you'd enjoy being a part of, I think. So, yeah, I want to thank you all for joining. Once again, thank you, Mr. Dolphin, for the donation. Really appreciate it. It's been an honor to have so many people supporting this channel, especially over the last few months, and the people who have been here as well since the start, which is almost 2 years ago. I'm really excited for what's coming, and we're going to have a fun next week and a half or so with the NFL draft coming up. So thank you, Toriana, for coming on. I much appreciate it. And we'll have more content coming out this week regarding the 2024 NFL draft. So y'all have a great day, and we'll see you next time. So go Jags.